damage that we are seeing has not been experienced in a generation. This morning we declared a national emergency for only the third time in our history. A short time ago I landed back in Wellington. I've been in constant contact with NEMA throughout the day and have just received a briefing from officials. We are still building a picture of the effects of the cyclone as it continues to unfold, but what we do know is the impact is significant and it is widespread. Here is the current situation as we know it at the moment. The centre of the cyclone is just north of the East Cape. It's moving in a southeasterly direction away from the country. There is still rain and wind forecast for the Tairāwhiti-Gisborne area, a few further showers for Hawke's Bay, and a large band of rain through the central part of the country. The good news is overnight tonight, in most areas we are expecting to see the weather easing. In the last 24 hours or so, Fire and Emergency New Zealand had 1,842 incidents related to Cyclone Gabrielle in their system and a further 383 other incidents. 200 Defence Force personnel have been so far deployed and there are more ready on standby. 22 Army vehicles are on the ground assisting with evacuations and emergency responses in Northland, Waikato, Auckland, Hawke's Bay and the Bay of Plenty. Vehicles and drivers are spread throughout Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Taranaki at the ready to support local civil defence efforts. An NH-90 helicopter and the Navy frigate Te Mana have also been deployed to assist with search and rescue missions. Transpower has declared a grid emergency following the loss of electricity supply to the Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, with potential outages for an extended period of time. Approximately 225,000 customers have been out without power across the North Island. That's a significant increase from the 75,000 yesterday evening. This is a very significant event for the electricity network, and the companies have not seen this level of damage since Cyclone Bowler in 1988. It is changing rapidly, and the lines companies are expecting that there could be more customers to be affected. They're working hard to restore power as quickly as possible. They've been able to do that in some parts of Hawke's Bay and Gisborne. But restoration may be delayed in some parts until weather conditions can improve. Power outages have also had a significant impact on the fibre, copper and mobile telecommunications networks. The Telecommunications Emergency Forum has been activated and is working closely with NEMA and local civil defence operations. The first priority of the telecommunications companies remains the restoration of regional cell phone signals. High winds and ongoing poor weather is hampering progress in that area. NEMA has also been notified by Chorus of a fibre cut, which is impacting Taupo through to Napier, including Gisborne, and the teams are working hard to restore connectivity in those areas. Woolworths, who owns Countdown and Super Value stores, have reported that they have 11 stores closed across the North Island, and Foodstuffs, who own Pack and Save, New World and Foursquare chains, have 30 stores closed. The stores that have been affected are in Northland, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Kaitaia and Whangarei. One of the key messages at this point is please only buy what you need. There is enough stock in warehouses, but getting it to stores is the main issue at the moment. That is likely to get easier in the coming days, so please only buy what you need to get yourselves through. A high number of roads have been affected by surface flooding and by slips. Crews are working around the clock to fix damage across the state highway network and on local roads. Waka Kotahi is updating the online journey planner with the latest available information regularly, and this is still the best source of information for anybody who needs to travel. As of 1:45 p.m. this afternoon, international and domestic flights had started again at Auckland Airport, but widespread travel disruption and delays are expected for the next few days, and the weather is likely to still play an impact there. Community organisations have continued to mobilise swiftly to provide flood relief and to support whānau, and they'll continue to do that. Yesterday's $11.5 million community support package will help to provide immediate relief for individuals, families and households. We know that providers and community groups have been working hard to support those affected by the floods, and it's a priority to get that funding out to them as quickly as possible. The Ministry of Social Development are leading that work. I want to acknowledge the many communities, particularly in the upper and eastern parts of the North Island, that have borne the brunt of this latest cyclone and the previous one. I know that there are people in other parts of the country and overseas trying to get hold of loved ones who are now cut off without reception. Our emergency response teams are working as hard as they can to get communications back online as soon as possible. And on behalf of all New Zealanders, I want to again express our enormous gratitude to our emergency responders. They're putting in the hard yards and their lives are on the line in the service of their communities. To the families of the volunteer firefighters who responded to events at Muriwai last night, and to the wider Fire and Emergency New Zealand family, our thoughts and hopes are with all of you. To the men and women of the Defence Force, to the linemen and women, the communications companies, the supermarkets, the transport companies working to get food and goods to where they are needed, to the roading crews that are making that all possible, we say thank you to you as well. We've received reassuring support from the Australian government, indicating that they are ready to provide support where and if needed. I've also had a call from the UK Prime Minister this morning, who's also offered the UK support and assistance. So finally, before I open up for questions, here is what we are asking people across the country to do. If you are feeling unsafe, there are a number of emergency centres that are open. Go to your local Civil Defence website for more details. If you are relocating, please let your friends and family know what you are up to. Please avoid all non-essential travel. Stay at home if you can, and as long as it is safe for you to do that. If you have to travel, please drive to the conditions. Watch out for flooding and debris on the road. Stay safe and do not take any chances. And keep up to date with Met Service weather warnings and advice from your local Civil Defence and Emergency Management group. It's important to stay informed even if your power is out, so listen to the radio for the latest Civil Defence updates. What we've witnessed over the last few weeks has taken a huge toll on many New Zealanders. It's been turning people's lives quite literally upside down. But we've also seen Kiwis from all walks of life coming together and stepping in and lending a hand. We've seen councils, businesses, community groups, iwi, our Defence Force, our emergency service, and our central government agencies all mucking in to help. And that is what Kiwis do, and that is how we will get through this. I'm now happy to open for questions.
Prime Minister, do you have any update on the number of people displaced?
No, we don't have a firm number on that yet, but I'll ask Minister McAnulty whether he's had anything since I got off the plane.
Well, we're only working on estimates here because there are still areas where we're struggling to communicate with, but we do know that it's roughly around 2,500. 1,000 people in the far north evacuated, 400 households in Auckland, 93 in Bay of Plenty, 75 in Waikato, and roughly 1,000 people in Hawke's Bay.
Have you managed to have much contact with particularly the Tairāwhiti region where those comms have been patchy with that?
There's been some improvement, but it's minor. There are other regions as well that we're struggling to communicate with. Wairoa in particular is of concern, but like I say, there's been some improvement since we last spoke. The satellite phones are continuing to work, and some areas of Tairāwhiti have regained connection.
Have you had any update on the missing firefighter?
Sorry?
The missing firefighter?
So the search is underway. They did a geotech assessment of the site, and they've been able to resume the search.
Prime Minister, is the worst over, or do we still need to brace? I know that it's moving away in Tairāwhiti, but what's the message to people who are watching, who have just had a really rough day?
People should still expect some bad weather overnight, particularly on the east coast. And of course, in some cases, as we know from our experience over the last few weeks, even if the rainfall eases off a bit, more rainfall can compound on top of the rainfall that we've already seen. So when it comes to things like slips and so on, we could still see more of that, even as the weather starts to ease. So we're still in for a bumpy time ahead. But as I've said, the good news is that we should see some calmer weather coming within the next 24 hours or so. And again, that will help us with our response efforts and help us to get a better handle on what's happening in some of those parts of the country that have been harder to reach so far.
Can you give us an idea of the scale of the Defence Force, the police, the emergency officials? I mean, for most of us, we're in just one area and we're only seeing bits and pieces coming in. Can you give us an idea of the big picture?
We've seen all of the different arms of government working closely together to get the resources to where they can best be used. Defence Force, for example, one of the things that they're doing is providing transport logistics to move people around the country, and that includes moving some of our responders from the South Island to the North Island. So the Defence Force are involved in that. Police have a very active operation around the country because they are in situ in many cases and can provide on-the-ground support, as do fire and emergency, who of course are dealing with some of that frontline response. So it's a pretty coordinated effort across government, all the more so because of the work that's happening here in this building out of the bunker to make sure that they are all communicating with each other and joining up in the way we would expect them to.
Tens of thousands of people? This might be a question for the controller, but tens of thousands.
We might have a specific number, but I can tell you there's tens of thousands of people involved in the response because, of course, there are a lot of volunteers on the ground helping out as well. Did you have a more specific number? I don't know whether
You're welcome.
Thanks, Minister. No, look, so we don't have a total at this point. It's a little bit too hard to sort of put that together, but it's a very significant effort. You'd have to look back to the response to the Kaikoura earthquake or the Canterbury earthquake sequence to see a larger response to a natural disaster in New Zealand.
Claire.
In terms of that, has anything been done yet to get like generators and maybe portaloos out to those places where they're expecting the power to be off for days, if not weeks?
One of the challenges there is that one of the reasons the power is off in some of those areas is that they're very difficult to get to at the moment, and the electricity companies will be working around the clock as soon as they're able to access the points of failure to try and get the power back on. And of course, as we see how the situation evolves and as we can get more access to some of those places, the Defence Forces on standby and ready to be able to provide some technical expertise and of course the logistical and transport capacity to be able to provide things like, if we can get them, and they're needed generators and portable toilets and all of those sorts of things.
Are you concerned that there might be an increase in the number of people that are displaced in those areas where you can't communicate?
That is an absolute risk. So there are teams on the ground there, and there is some contact with the teams on the ground. But there is no question that particularly in some areas like Wairoa, we're not at this point absolutely clear how isolated those communities are, but it would appear quite isolated at this point. And so we're working very hard to try and get a fuller picture of exactly what's happening in those communities.
Not a full picture, but looking at what you know thus far, how much is this recovery going to cost? Is it going to be billions?
Look, it's very hard to put a number on it at this point, and I think that kind of speculation, people will pick numbers out of thin air, and they may be right or they may be wrong. It's really too early to put any kind of exact number on it. And of course the insurance sector will pay, but they'll certainly play a very big role in meeting some of that, and a significant portion of that cost.
Just on the east coast, what you've seen, does the scale of this outstrip Cyclone Gabrielle?
Well, I wasn't around in this kind of role during Cyclone Gabrielle, but certainly the reports that we've had is that it's the most extreme weather event that we've experienced in a very long time. I think in the fullness of time, we'll know whether or not, how it compares to Cyclone Gabrielle.
How extensive is the damage to farmland and cropland, and is there any risk to our food supply lines?
I think what we do know from extreme weather events is, of course, it does have an impact on food supply and food prices, which is a factor that I think we've all become aware of in recent times. Again, we won't know the full extent of that for a wee while yet.
For those on the east coast that are stuck in their homes, floodwaters are high and they don't have running water or power, what is the advice if they can't leave themselves or evacuate themselves? Do they wait for people to come to them?
Yes, the local civil defence teams are assessing those that are most vulnerable in isolated areas. The strength of our civil defence structure is that it is localised, so they know those areas well and will be making efforts to contact them and evacuate if they can. We are encouraging people, if it's safe, to self-evacuate if they do feel unsafe, and we do know that they have centres available to support those people. But in the specific scenario that you have outlined, that they want to evacuate but can't, we're confident that civil defence have a grasp of the situation there. Roger, do you have anything to add to that?
No, nothing further. I think that's the correct advice.
I'm aware that police are driving around in boats through Hawke's Bay this afternoon, evacuating people out of their homes. Do we know how many people have been rescued from their flood-submerged homes through that?
The figure that I have for Hawke's Bay is that in total there's been 1,000 people that have needed to be evacuated. I've been briefed that all agencies are assisting in that. The military is, the police is, and FENS is as well. We've sought assurances from police and FENS whether they feel they have the resources to cope with demand, and they've given us that resource. So too has the military, who's been able to fulfil all requests for assistance up to this point.
And
any
the
briefing
RSC
on
workers,
the
the
group of-
RSC workers stuck
yeah,
on the hill in Fern Hill. Is there an update on whether they'll be choppered out?
So that operation is underway. There have been some that have been rescued. There are still some that require rescuing, but that is underway, and we're hoping that that'll be completed soon.
Or chopper?
By chopper. Well, the delay was that the weather didn't allow the NH90 to get up, but as soon as it did, they were up and rescuing. There were 2 rescue operations underway in Hawke's Bay, one involving the RSC workers. So that's encouraging, and we'll continue to get updates as it progresses.
Joe and then Luke. Yeah.
You mentioned 41 supermarkets that have had to close. Are you aware of where they are specifically, and is there any situations where communities are now without access to a supermarket as a result of the closure?
No, I've only got the broad locations, so Northland, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Kaitaia and Whangarei. I haven't got the specific stores that have been closed, but we'll endeavour to get that from Woolworths and Foodstuffs, and we'll get you a complete list.
Are you already in a situation where emergency services, Defence Force are having to actually get food into communities though, because people can't get to the shop even if they wanted to, and there is one open?
It's certainly one of the things that our local response teams will be doing is making sure, as much as they possibly can, that people are not going without. Local civil defence centres will have some provisions and some supplies, but also just an overall message to New Zealanders who are in this situation is make sure you're looking after each other. So pool resources where you can with your friends and neighbours as much as you are able to do so if you are in that position where you're cut off.
Is there genuine concerns though, because there are obviously communities that you don't have comms with at the moment, that these might be people, vulnerable people who actually don't have stock at the moment and don't have access to it? Is that a genuine concern?
Yes.
And what's the sort of immediate response to that? Get comms back up or more than that?
I'm sorry, in what regard?
Well, I mean, in terms of those people, if there's concerns that there are people who don't have access to and don't have anything at home, are you concentrating on getting something to them, or is it just getting the comms back up to see where these people are?
Well, we won't be, if we can't communicate with them, we won't be in a position to know that. But obviously, as we can communicate with them, then we'll be working as hard as we can to get support to them.
The question is, are you sending people into areas where there are no comms, or is it just, are those areas just too risky to get into?
Well, that will be largely led by the local response teams, but...
Yeah, so we've got a combination of issues affecting this, is that not only the lack of comms, but also the bad weather preventing teams going in there. As the weather improves, regardless of whether the comms are restored, we're going to be in a much better position to be able to access those, assess the need and deliver. I asked a similar question of officials earlier, and the response was that all options are on the table. So that addresses the question earlier around generators and portaloos. We'll assess the need and get them what they need, but the first step is actually being able to gain access.
Luke and Claire.
Yeah, just back on comms, you said that some sort of groups being convened around, what was that group called, around sort of mobile coverage, internet, that sort of stuff?
That's right. I'll make sure I get the name of the group correct, but it is the Telecommunications Emergency Forum. So it's basically a partnership between all of the telecommunications companies with involvement from government to make sure we get the essential telecommunications up and running.
So what does that group do now?
Well, they'll be making sure that the telecommunications companies will be cooperating with each other. They've got a shared interest in making sure that they're pooling their resources to get telecommunications restored as quickly as possible. And of course, central government will be feeding into that as well. So the logistical support and any on-the-ground support that we can provide will be endeavouring to do that too.
So what does that look like? Whoever the local person is going around just fixing cell phone towers?
Well, one of the challenges is that a number of those cell phone towers will be operating on batteries at the moment. They're designed to operate on batteries for temporary power outages. Some of those batteries will be getting pretty low. So I think the priority is going to be to try and restore power as quickly as possible to those, or to get alternative power sources to them. They'll be working together to do that.
Right. So mobile towers operate off batteries in the same way?
Most of them will have some backup power supply, but it won't last for long. And I imagine some of them will be getting pretty low already, if not exhausted.
48 hours usually.
About 48 hours, yeah.
Can you lose more communications?
It is possible if we can't get supply to those that are currently operating on batteries.
How critical are the Maori marae and the whānau in those isolated areas, given that they have direct access to their whānau and that's what they did during COVID? So how critical are those Māori groups?
Well, I want to acknowledge the work of marae up around the country. In difficult times, they are always there, providing a welcome and support to those who need it. Supported by other community groups as well. We absolutely welcome that support and acknowledge them and thank them for that.
Just coming back to the previous question, so the longer that an area is potentially isolated, the worse the comms with that area could become.
That's a possibility. I don't want to sort of indicate that that's exactly what's going to happen. Clearly, the group is going to be working as hard as they can to make sure we keep as many communications lines open as possible.
Zooming out.
Clear.
Will you be looking at some kind of more of a business support group, for example, for orchardists who've pretty much lost their entire crops and stuff like that?
Yeah, at the moment we're still in the response phase of just trying to get through the next 24 to 48 hours. But the government will absolutely be looking at how we best can support recovery efforts across the country. It's still too early to speculate on exactly what that will look like, but we'll be looking very closely at who are the businesses, sectors and communities that have been most affected and how can we best support them.
Other than the search and rescue operation that's underway for the firefighter, are you aware of any other missing people that there are search operations underway for?
Well, there's those two operations that are underway in Hawke's Bay as well. I mean, they're not missing in the sense that we know where they are, but they have been stranded for quite some time. And there's been a real delay because of the weather that even an NH90 couldn't get to them. But like I said earlier, is that operation's underway. That some of those have been rescued and some of them are still being rescued. We'll be getting updates, but we're really hopeful that those two missions will be complete shortly.
And what about just missing people is there anyone else?
I haven't been advised of any other missing persons operations. Have you, Roger?
Not that we're aware of, but those. Thank you. Not that we're aware of, but those operations are led out by emergency services on the ground, and things are still developing this evening.
Where exactly are those two operations in Hawke's Bay? Where specifically?
Well, there was one just south of Napier that got caught with the fast-rising river this morning. They were on the roof of their cars, is what I was briefed at, for quite some time, and the others were the RSE workers that were referred to earlier.
How many people don't have comms?
I don't have a specific number on that at the moment, unfortunately.
Do you have any idea how many homes might be unlivable?
No, we haven't got an estimate on that at this point either.
Just a question for the Minister about comms in Tairāwhiti. Could you just give us a general sense of what areas are completely blacked out, so just the satellite phone, and are you expecting that come morning we'll still be in that position, or do you hold out hope that overnight things may be restored to a better level?
Well, as the weather improves, it gives us more hope because it gives us two options. It means that the technicians can improve the connections quicker, but it also gives us an opportunity to get in there, assess the need and give them what they want. Earlier when I referred to the answer I got to the similar question as all options are on the table, there is the opportunity to consider, when the weather allows it, for a military communications unit to be established to reconnect in the interim. And so that's being explored at the moment, but it'd have to be an appropriate measure and we'd have to assess how long it's going to take to re-establish communications. And that's just as relevant to Wairoa as it would be to other areas like Tairāwhiti.
Given the extent of the resource that is being drawn on for this response across the whole of large parts of the North Island, how long can you kind of keep this level of resourcing up for, and at what point will you need to reallocate or draw on overseas resources on that?
So I do want to acknowledge, particularly in the upper North Island, that there are some pretty tired people who are dealing with this response now, hot on the heels of another response that probably feels like they hadn't quite finished with that one and they're dealing with this one as well. We are looking to relocate people from around the country and as the first response to that, and that's included bringing people up from the South Island to help relieve some of that pressure on the North Island and to give people just the opportunity to have a bit of rest and a bit of sleep. What I have seen, having been up in Auckland in particular, is that there are some people up there who are absolutely committed to seeing this through. We'll be making sure that they look after themselves, but there is no lack of commitment to the job that they have in front of them. They are absolutely pulling out all of the stops to support their communities through this.
Are you likely to draw on any resource from Australia or the UK like has been offered, and what sort of resource would that be?
Look, I wouldn't rule that out. Yeah.
So do you have any idea?
12 hours, what areas are you in particular worried about? And also just going back to the ongoing operation, how long have those people been stuck for?
I'll answer the first part of that and I'll get the Minister to answer the second part. Clearly in the next 24 hours or so, our key areas of focus are restoring contact with those areas where contact is currently limited, trying to get power on to as many households as we can. The lines companies are indicating that could still be challenging and it could still take some time, and making sure that we're getting temporary support in place where we need to have that temporary support. So that's the key areas of focus. And in terms of how long they were waiting for,
So the situation in Hawke's Bay last night, it was obviously on a watch and a warning, but the level of rainfall was more than was expected, and it caused some significant disruption to some communities, and that's what caused those both instances of people being isolated. They've been there for many hours now. What delayed that was the weather prevented local teams, but then eventually also the military with the NH90 from being able to access them. It's pleasing that the weather's cleared enough for them to do that now.
Infrastructure-wise, do you have a big picture of how many roads are going to be fixed, how many bridges are going to be fixed, how many schools are out that kids can't go back to, how many hospitals are down?
Not at this point. Obviously, the transport network takes a wee while to get a handle on because in many cases we have to send someone out to drive those roads to assess the true extent of the damage, and that work hasn't been completed yet, and some of it can't happen until the weather is eased enough for them to be able to do that safely. It's going to be significant though, and I want to provide those communities with a reassurance that we at a government level acknowledge that it's going to be significant. I don't want to just pluck a dollar figure out of the air, but we will absolutely see this through and make sure that the work that needs to be done gets done.
Roger's
It's okay, Prime Minister. I was just going to add a further comment on that. I can understand the need and the desire to have this information up front, but I just want to underline that we're actually still very much in the emergency phase of this. The priority for agencies is the safety of the public and life safety missions, which are currently underway at the moment. Evacuations are still going on. The next priority will be that immediate impact assessment and damage assessment, alongside that welfare assessment of the needs of communities once we can reach them in places that are currently isolated and where we have, frankly, blind spots. So we will get to that, but at the moment the priority must remain on those life safety missions and helping people get out of their homes into a safe place before we can actually get to the point of understanding the impacts.
There's been a huge amount of frustration vented today, particularly from the East Coast region about forestry slash. Are you going to do something about it?
Yes, but let's have that conversation once we're through the emergency response phase. But I think we absolutely have to acknowledge that this is a significant issue, and it is something where people want to see more action from government. I've heard that message.
Can I just go back to the hospital
Zooming out
schools?
a wee bit, a lot of the debate here today has been about climate change, the impact of that on the cyclone. In the 2 weeks that you've been PM, you've actually taken a couple of actions that will weaken New Zealand's action on climate change, lengthening the fuel subsidy and axing the biofuels mandate. So, I mean, everyone knows why you've done that, but has this storm given you any pause for thought on the severity of climate change, what's coming down the pipeline, and what you might choose to do in the 9 months?
I disagree with your characterisation. I've said all along that climate change remains a core area of focus for the government, and I think recent weather events have highlighted the importance of that. There is significant debate about whether the biofuels mandate was the right way of reducing our emissions from transport when there are other alternatives and other things that we can look at, and that is absolutely what we're going to do. In terms of extending the fuel subsidies, we have to acknowledge that actually there are people still having to get in their cars and drive every day to work, and we need to support them through what is a very, very difficult time at the moment. That does not in any way, I don't believe, undermines our commitment to tackling the causes of climate change.
Fresh reflections on what this storm means?
I think it will have underscored for everybody the importance of the work that we have to do as a country to reduce our emissions and to make sure that we're really rising to the challenge of climate change. It is real, it's having an impact, and we have a responsibility to do something about it.
Is there any financial support for our whānau that have been affected? Any financial support for those that have lost everything?
At the moment, the first thing that people should do is speak to the Ministry of Social Development. Civil defence payments have been activated so they can access immediate financial support. And then, of course, through that process, through talking to MSD, they'll be able to be matched up with other financial support that might be available. I will wrap up in a minute, but Joe.
Just going back to hospitals and schools, is there any confirmation at this point of any hospitals or medical centres that I guess are used in smaller communities that are relied on for emergency care that have been basically taken out as a result of the last few days? And secondly, on schools, what is the message going forward in terms of going to school, tertiary, etc., etc.?
And I'll do the last part of that. In terms of schools, just follow the guidance of your school. Clearly, schools will be in the best position to judge the extent of the damage and whether they're in a position to be able to reopen. And they have clear communication channels with their families. So I'd encourage every family just to follow the guidance of your school. And it might be a little bit uneven because, the damage might be uneven across schools, even in the same community. So follow the guidance of your schools. I haven't seen anything on hospitals, but I'll just check with anyone to my left has.
Yeah, we know broadly that there have been some medical suppliers or providers that have been impacted, but contingencies have been put in place. They've either relocated or they've been able to look at alternative ways to allow people to access. I'll give you an example of Hawke's Bay. The link between Hastings and Napier was compromised for a long time and still is to some degree. The health providers there, given the nature of that area where some people travel from Hastings for work, etc., they've got a plan in place to keep some people south of the divide and some people north and delivering that. So we asked this question of the health officials earlier, and they were confident that where we know about, that things are in place.
So no actual infrastructure in terms of actual hospitals or medical centres that would be necessary, I guess, have been taken out that you know of at this point?
I haven't been briefed on that, no.
The last couple of questions, so we'll go to Richard and then over here. Yeah.
State Highway 1 is closed across the Desert Road at the moment. How soon do you think you'll be able to reopen that? Because, of course, it's critical in terms of getting trucks between Auckland and Wellington. Yeah,
Waka Kotahi will be working around the clock doing everything that they possibly can to make sure our state highway network is back up and running and to reopen those supply lines. We've also got the military helping as well. So where there is a prolonged period of disruption, as we saw in Kaikoura, for example, following the earthquake, we have other means of getting supplies to communities where it takes a long time to get the roading network re-established.
What are the specific issues with Wairoa?
My understanding is that there has been significant disruption to the links in and out of Wairoa in terms of the transport network. Further...
Look, the weather's not helping. Yeah. The communication's out. We understand the power's out. We're aware of some flooding, but we're not aware of to what extent. And until the weather clears and we're either to re-establish communications or get people on the ground, we don't have a full understanding of the impact there, and that makes us feel anxious and that makes us feel concerned.
Any sat phones or anything like that, or is it total silence?
Well, they did have a sat phone, but my understanding is because there's no power, the charge on that phone may not be lasting. So we are really concerned about that. We want to establish links. As soon as the weather allows us to do so, there are plans in place to get that underway.
Is Wairoa the only area that's completely blacked out like that?
Roger?
And a comment. Just on the situation in Wairoa, I was advised just before, as we were coming in, there's a Air Force reconnaissance flight going up just to get some eyes on things, and that might provide an opportunity just to resupply. Just in terms of comms for other areas, really the main concern is for Tairāwhiti, where cell phone towers are down, but we do have satellite phone links. And I was advised just as we were coming in, we've got some Starlink units that we're going to get into both Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti as quickly as possible. We've got an option on another 10 tomorrow that will pick up as well and get them there quickly.
All right, we'll wrap up there. Thanks, everybody. But we will send out an advisory around further updates, because I imagine that there'll be more news to share, and as soon as we can, we'll let you know when we can do that. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Well done.